Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. We cover everything Major League, from spring training to the World Series. We've got your favorite club covered, from New York to Boston to LA. This is the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast.
Welcome into another edition of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. It is Thursday, April 29th. Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic week so far out there. We got another great show lined up for you here today. We're going to be talking about the latest news involving the Colorado Rockies. They are looking for a new general manager after their current GM stepped down earlier this week. We're also going to talk about the news in the Pioneer League. If you guys haven't heard yet, apparently they're listeners of the podcast because they are taking my idea for extra innings that we're going to talk about a little bit further. Then in segment number 2, we're going to get into some college baseball, run through the top 25. Last week we looked at some of the draft prospects. Today we'll do a little bit of bracketology, kind of take a look at the lower level conferences and ultimately who people predict are going to win those tournaments and get that automatic bid into the postseason. And then we'll wrap things up in segments 3 and 4, talking about Major League Baseball and what's been going on this week. Anything crazy going on? Of course there's been something crazy going on. It's baseball. You see something new every day, and that's why you watch the game, all 162 of them. But let's jump right in here, right off the top. Like I said, Jeff Bridich steps down as general manager of the Colorado Rockies. This was apparently a mutual agreement or mutual decision between the Rockies and Bridich. Bridich joined the organization all the way back in 2004. He rose through the ranks. He was named Senior Director of Baseball Operations in 2006. Then he was Senior Director of Player Development and ultimately promoted to General Manager back in 2014. So he's been the GM there now for coming up on 7 years, 6+. Under Bridich, Colorado made the postseason back in 2017 and 2018, but it's pretty much his handling of Nolan Arenado and that particular trade that sealed his fate and put him back on the job market, because after signing Arenado to an 8-year, $260 million deal just as recently as 2019, he said, we're going to compete every year. We want to bring back Arenado. We just made the postseason for a couple of years. Well, the last 2 years after that deal, they finished in 4th place in each one of those years. And then he traded Arenado for what was not a good return. I mean, he got Austin Gumber and 4 minor leaguers that basically everybody just chastised the deal across the industry and said, you didn't get anything for possibly one of the best third basemen in the history of baseball, as well as you agreed to pay St. Louis $51 of the remaining $199 million at the contract at the time he was traded. It's just, man, it was just bad decision there. Ultimately, I mean, the signing wasn't a horrible decision. The AAV, all that stuff isn't too bad, but just the trade itself. I mean, you're telling me you couldn't get anything better for Nolan Arenado? Just fascinating. So Bridich, he met with ownership, leadership, and quote, it became abundantly clear that ushering in a new leadership structure is critically important. With that in mind, we arrived at the decision to part ways, and ultimately it will be what is best for the Rockies and for me, end quote. So, mutual. Basically, they said, hey, we're going to fire you, but we're going to give you the dignity of walking out of here. And it's kind of like all the other coaches, right? They resign from their post instead of being fired. Well, this is pretty much what happened with Bridich here in Colorado. So it's come out here now that they are going to name an interim general manager for the rest of the 2021 season. And then after this season commences, that's when they're going to get into their search for the next full-time general manager here moving forward. So probably ownership just going to sit in for the next couple of months, but that's not a post I want to have over the next couple of months because they got huge decisions coming up when it comes to the roster. And this is why whoever takes this job is really going to be in for the long haul. I mean, it is not going to be a coveted position on the market. I mean, yes, at the end of the day, there's 30 teams. There's only 30 general managers, so you're going to take the job if it's offered to you, but you're going to take it with the understanding that you're probably going to fail, at least for the first couple of years. It's not going to be very positive, and the interim team is going to make a couple of big decisions before you even get to the opportunity to make decisions, right? Because you got Trevor Story coming up here. He's going to be a free agent after the year, and Colorado off to an 8-14 start. It looks like it's going to be in their best interest to trade him out of town, try to get some assets, try to replenish that minor league system. You also have John Gray, right-handed pitcher who's going to be a free agent. And, I mean, with Story, you got Tatis, 340, Lindor, 341, so he's going to be up for a big payday. If I'm Story, I don't really want to return to Colorado with all the chaos that's taken place there. So he's probably going to walk, which is just another reason why ultimately you're going to trade him. And that's going to be the top priority in the meantime, right? And that's number one as to why this is going to be a tough job, because even with Trevor Story in tow here, if you look at some of the projections coming into this year, like Zips and all of those guys, they were projected to win 61, 66, 68 games this year, a lot closer to that 100 loss mark than they are to being a competitive team. And that's why you're going to move Story. It's just, there's no other choice here. It's really their only option to try to jumpstart this rebuild and try to get anybody back within the minor league system. Because number two, you got a bad Major League Baseball team, right? They're 8-14. You're going to move Gray. You're going to move Story. So you're really struggling here in the near future with not a lot of people being called up. There you go. Sportsline 68 wins, Zip 66, and Pacoda 61. So the Major League team isn't very good. I mean, yes, they got Ryan McMahon. They got Garrett Hampson, Brendan Rodgers, Ramil Tapia, who are supposed to be everyday guys for them. McMahon, he's off to a solid start, but the rest of the guys, I mean, Tabia's been pretty good as well, but the other guys really trying to figure it out. They're going to be in competition for the number one overall pick, which is one positive. Based on last week's episode, obviously that's either going to be Leiter Jr. or Kumar Rocker out of Vanderbilt, so that could be one piece in the rotation to look forward to. But playing in Colorado, that's also a tough thing, right? Just that weird ballpark in Coors Field, because no free agent pitchers are really going to want to sign with the Rockies, which is why you really have to grow your arm talent from within, because if I'm a stud pitcher out on the market and I got Colorado looking at me, anybody else, Philly, Washington, whoever it is, I'm going to go to those other spots, because career ERAs in Colorado are much higher than they are anywhere else in Major League Baseball. So you got to deal with Coors Field when it comes to the open market. Yeah, maybe you could get some bats to stay because the offensive numbers look better, but you also have that overhang when it comes to Hall of Fame. Oh, he's good, but he played in Coors Field for his entire career. So what are his road and home splits? What's it looking like there? It's a tough ballpark and a tough city to really draw in that top talent when you get to the free agent markets. And on top of a not very good Major League team, you also have a pretty lackluster farm system here. I mean, they've made 6 top 10 selections in the past 9 years, but not a lot of people have panned out. I mean, last year they took high school outfielder Zach Veen, who, again, out of high school, he's going to take some time to develop. He's going to be a few years. So the Rockies, they're currently in the bottom third when it comes to minor league rankings. Baseball America has them at 25th out of 30. So you don't have a very good major league team. You don't have a very good minor league system. You got a funky ballpark. And on top of all of that, you're in an absolutely brutal division for the next handful of years. I mean, you got the Dodgers, of course, have won the NL West 8 years in a row. They're going to win 110, 120 games, maybe break the record this year. you got the Padres, who basically this offseason put themselves right up into that tier of a superpower. Yes, they're right around 500 early on, but a lot of the guys they have signed are for extended periods of time in their career, so they're not going anywhere. Arms, bats, the works, bullpen, they got it all. And then you got the Giants, who are overachieving and being managed very well by Gabe Kapler and position themselves to be, very solid in the wild card picture in the National League West. So, tough big league team, tough minor league roster, weird ballpark, brutal division. It's just not a very appealing job for anybody to head out there to Colorado. So, what's the new guy going to have to do? Well, Trevor Story and Gray are going to be out of town by the time he gets there. So you're going to have to start investing into the future by nailing this draft at the top of the draft to really turn things around. Then you're going to have to get to evaluating who you currently have in your minor league system. Are any of them any good? Are they going to be future players? Where are we at? Ultimately, can we sign anybody? Who's going to want to come here? And just, man, it's tough. You got outfielder Ryan Vidali, number 4 prospect for the Rockies, corner outfielder Colton Wecker, relievers Lucas Gilbreth, Justin Lawrence. Are these guys going to be guys who could potentially help you out? Left-handed starter Ryan Rollison, who was the 2018 first rounder for them. How close are these guys? When are they going to get here? You also then have to kind of improve that relationship with the fans. I mean, they're not happy with what went down with Nolan Arenado. They're not going to be happy with a Trevor Story trade. So you're going to have to kind of rekindle that relationship and make people want to come back to the ballpark. You also got Bud Black in the dugout as the manager. He's going to have to kind of embrace what's going on, let them know, hey, it's going to be a couple of years. We're looking to rebuild here. It's just going to be a long process for the Rockies because, again, not a very good big league team, not a very good minor league system. And that's the ingredients in the formula for a team that's going to struggle over the next handful of years, and then sprinkle in that they have to play the Dodgers, Padres, and Giants X number of times each year. And it's a long road to recovery here for the Colorado Rockies. And I don't envy whoever goes in and takes that job as general manager starting next year. So it better be a long contract, and expectations better be that this isn't going to be a quick turnaround, and we're going to struggle here for a number of years out in Denver. So it'll be fascinating to see ultimately who's up for that job, who's going to take that job. If there's multiple GM openings across baseball, that one's going to be at the bottom of the list when it comes to priorities for top candidates out there to potentially replace the guy out in Colorado. So now I wanted to touch on at the end of the segment here, the Pioneer League, which is an independent baseball league that's designated as a Major League Baseball partner league. It's kind of out in the northwest part of the country out there. Well, apparently they're listeners of the podcast, and they've been hearing me talk to you guys about some of the rules I would implement to improve baseball across the board. Now, they took it one step further, but they are going to replace extra innings with a home run derby. They're basically calling it the, quote, knockout rule that will resolve games with a sudden death home run derby. So here's basically the breakdown. Under the rule, each team designates a hitter who receives 5 pitches with the game determined by the most home runs hit. If it is still tied after the first knockout round, another hitter is selected for a sudden death home run face-off until a winner is declared. So basically my rule was, hey, after 11, 12 innings, whatever it is, give them 5 pitches, let them go, and then just do a sudden death. Well, this one's going to happen just after 9 innings, and ultimately they're going to move on from those hitters, right? So if you have Bryce Harper versus Ronald Acuna Jr., and they tie with 3 home runs apiece on each of them, maybe then you go to Rhys Hoskins and Freddie Freeman, who are going to be in a sudden death style of walk-off. So the response to this on social media and on Twitter when it came out was overwhelmingly negative, I would say, from the majority of the responses. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. I fancy myself an old-school baseball fan. I like the National League. I like bunting, double switches, whatever it is. But if you're telling me, and I'm going to use Phillies kind of for a reference, being a Philadelphia guy, but if you're telling me you'd rather watch Roman Quinn hit against a position player pitching in the 14th inning than a home run derby between Bryce Harper and Ronald Acuna Jr., I think you're out of your mind. I mean, Robin Quinn, he's hitting .050 for the year. Throw in any other center fielder you want. Mickey Moniak, whoever it is, right? So you're going to tell me you'd rather watch 8-9-1, right? We were watching the Dodgers and Padres play the other night in an extra inning game, and both benches in extra innings, bases loaded or a guy on third with less than 2 outs, had to pinch hit with a pitcher because they had run through their bench earlier in that game. And I'm just like, no, I don't want to watch Clayton Kershaw try to hit here in the 12th inning and strike out against a submarine left-hander. Like, yeah, I guess it's kind of entertaining, but if you're telling me the other option is to watch a home run derby between Fernando Tatis Jr. and Mookie Betts, I'm signing up for that any day of the week. And again, this is where I say, okay, give me 10, give me 11 innings. Give me a little bit of extra baseball. Yes, there's enough bullpen arms in the major league to get this done, right? We're not going to go to the 13th, 14th, 15th where you see position players, where you see pitchers play in left field, where you get all of this crazy nonsense. Go 11 innings, and then give me the walk-off, right? Give me the home run derby. You're telling me the electricity in the building when Bryce Harper hits a walk-off home run derby homer, flips the bat 20 feet in the air, people come sprinting out of the dugout, isn't going to be absolutely electric television? You're wrong. It's pretty much that simple. I mean, Acuna, Soto, Trout, Ohtani, any of these guys, sign them up. JD Martinez, let me see these guys who always, don't do the home run derby itself. Judge, Stanton, I don't care who it is. Abreu, take anybody from your favorite team out there. Watch them hit a game-winning walk-off home run in extras. I don't care if it's home run derby style. You're going to get that flip. You're going to get the celebration. You're going to get the water pulled on you. And it is going to be absolutely electric television. And I'm telling you, I love it. I love this idea. It's coming. It's going to be here in the future. Let them play a few innings of extra inning baseball. But I am absolutely out on position players pitching and facing off against 8-9-1, 8 being a guy hitting 100, 9 being the pitcher, and 1, with 2 outs and nobody on, just trying to launch a home run to get the walk-off because everybody's sick and tired of playing baseball for 4.5 hours. So that's my 2 cents. I love it. I can't wait to see it. I think it's going to be absolutely awesome television if it ever makes its way. And if it goes to the minor leagues, let's do it. I would love to see some prospects just try to rake home runs. So, but anyway, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I'd be very curious to hear your guys' take because it does seem I'm in the minority when it comes to that sort of opinion. But that'll do it for the first segment here of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Step aside here now for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to talk a little college baseball. We're getting close to the postseason. Stick around. Find out who's going to make the tournament.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the second segment of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you haven't done so yet, check us out on social media. Head to Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Follow the GSMC Baseball Podcast. That way you guys can stay up to date with all the latest intel going on across Major League Baseball, as well as some college baseball. You guys know I like to sprinkle it in, having played D1 baseball myself. Like to keep you guys updated on the college action because, college basketball, college football, they all get a ton of love, but nobody shows love to college baseball. So want to give a shout out to all the college kids out there listening, everybody who's playing D1, D2, D3, NAIA, whatever it is. Want to keep you guys up to date on what's going on in their world here. So check us out on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, GSMC Baseball. that continues to help us grow and spread the word here, as we want to be the best podcast we can be and bringing you guys the latest information here. So, talking about now our college baseball segments. Last week I talked to you guys about the Major League Baseball draft coming up and ultimately who are the top prospects. Of course, you got some high school kids sprinkled in there. So, wanted to circle back, give you an update on the top 25, and then let you guys know where bracketology currently stands. Everybody loves Selection Sunday when it comes to college hoops, but we're getting close to Selection Sunday for college baseball here, as that's coming up in the middle of May, almost about a month away here. So just wanted to get touch base on ultimately 1 through 16. That's how they do it. So they have 16 regions full of 4 teams. And then the top team from each of those regions goes on to a super regional, which again is a best 2 out of 3 between those teams. And then the top 8 make it to Omaha in the College World Series. So it is a double elimination, that first regional series. 1 plays 4, 2 plays 3, and then so on and so forth. You guys who have played baseball at any sort of travel level understand kind of that double elimination bracket. So it's ultimately interesting that who are the 16 host cities going to be. Sometimes it's pretty much as chalk as the top 16 teams. Other times comes down to revenue, comes down to facilities, comes down to location, ultimately who gets those bids. But it's also fun to see who the 4 seeds are, right? Who's going to win the Patriot League, the league I played in at Lehigh University. One bracketologist has Lehigh, another one has Army, right? So you got Army, Navy, Bucknell, Lafayette, Lehigh in that bracket. Who's going to come out of there? Army and Lehigh seem to be the top 2 out of the Patriot League here in 2021. But the top 25, we got Arkansas still at number 1. 1, 2, and 3 have held steady over the past 2 weeks. You got Arkansas, Vanderbilt, and Texas. Arkansas took 2 out of 3 against South Carolina this past weekend, and next up for them is LSU, as they are now 32-7 overall in the year. Number 2 is Vanderbilt at 31-7. This past weekend, they won 2 out of 3 games against Mississippi State. So Mississippi State went from number 4 down to number 6 based on losing 2 out of 3 to Vanderbilt. And number 3 is Texas at 33-9 overall, as they hold steady, winning 2 out of 3 at Oklahoma State, with a series coming up next against number 11 Texas Tech here this weekend. So Texas and Texas Tech going at it in what should be a good one. We got a newcomer at number 4, the Tennessee Volunteers. They continue to climb up the rankings at 32-9 overall. So they just keep winning, keep on climbing. They took 2 out of 3 against Texas A&M this past weekend. Next on the list for them is Kentucky coming to town. Number 5, another team that keeps on climbing in the rankings, and that's the TCU Horned Frogs. They are 29-10 overall. They went 3-1 last week, including 2 out of 3 over Kansas. Next time this weekend, they'll take a trip to West Virginia to take on the Hokies. So Tennessee and TCU make it into the top 5. Mississippi State, they fall from 4 to 6. And then Louisville stays put at number 7. They only played 1 game this past weekend due to some COVID protocols. They were going to face off with the Pitt Panthers, but ultimately that got canceled due to COVID. So they had the week off, and next they will travel to Clemson to take on the Tigers. At number 8, you have Notre Dame. They're up from number 10 on the list. They are 20-8 overall. They're playing good baseball as they won 2 out of 3 at Boston College. Next up, they'll have North Carolina for the Irish. The Oregon Ducks, they move up to number 9 from number 13. They're 24-9 overall, 10-5 in the Pac-12. They won 2 out of 3 games against UCLA after winning 2 out of 3 at USC, Southern California. They'll face off against Washington State this upcoming weekend. At number 10, we got the East Carolina Pirates. They fall from number 9 to number 10 after a 2-2 week, in which, let's see here, they split those 4 games with UCF. They'll now travel to take on Wichita State. Texas Tech, like we mentioned, at number 11, they fall from number 5. So we could have had a top 5 matchup between Texas and Texas Tech, but ultimately they went 1-2 this past weekend. Let's see here who they face off. They lost 2 out of 3 to Baylor before they traveled to Texas to take on Texas. Arizona, another Pac-12 team, comes in at number 12, followed by South Carolina at number 13. But Arizona, with a 4-0 week, jumped up from number 18 to number 12 in which was the biggest positive leap for them. They had lost 3 straight earlier this month, but have since won 6 in a row, including a sweep at Southern California this weekend. So Arizona all the way up to number 12. South Carolina went 1-2 and fell from number 11 to number 13. They lost 2 out of 3 at Arkansas. So, of course, the Razorbacks, one of the top teams. So, nothing too tough there, but they'll travel to take on Ole Miss this next weekend. And then Florida at number 14 after a 3-1 weekend. Charlotte's next on the list at number 15. Conference USA getting some love there. Charlotte, let's see here. They took 3 out of 4 from Old Dominion, as well as a win at North Carolina, and then they got a makeup series with Old Dominion. So 8 out of 9 games against ODU for Charlotte, and that put them up from number 19 up to 15 here in the rankings as they're making a bit of a move. Number 16 is Louisiana Tech. They went 2-2, so they fell from 14 to 16 overall. They split this past weekend with Marshall, and next they'll take on Middle Tennessee. The Pitt Panthers fall to 17 from number 16. Again, 0-0 this week due to some COVID protocol and having the weekend at Louisville canceled. They'll face Northern Kentucky here in a non-conference matchup before getting back in conference versus Boston College in a couple of weeks. The Stanford Cardinal go from 17 to 18. They were 0-0 again. They had some COVID protocol to deal with. They were supposed to play Washington, but ultimately were unable to get those games in. And then you have Ole Miss, Mississippi. They fell from 12 to 19, going 2-2 this past week as they dumped a series to LSU, losing 2 out of 3. They'll face South Carolina in what will be another tough series for them coming up. You got the Florida State Seminoles jumping up to number 20 from number 25. They had themselves a good week, winning 2 out of 3 at Georgia Tech. And they will also be out of conference facing Troy before they get the Notre Dame Fighting Irish back there in the ACC. 21 through 24, these are all newcomers to the rankings here. We got Gonzaga coming in at number 21. They had themselves a 4-0 week out there in the West Coast Conference as they swept BYU. Next up on the list will be San Diego for some conference play. Then you have Nebraska at 20-7 coming in at number 22. They took 2 out of 3 against Michigan State after sweeping Penn State. So they've been playing good baseball recently. Then you got Southern Miss at number 23 out of Conference USA. They went 3-1 this past week, taking 3 out of 4 against Western Kentucky. They'll face off against Rice here this upcoming weekend. Number 24, you got UC Irvine entering the rankings after being unranked out of the Big West. They took 2 out of 3 against Pac-12's foe, Oregon State. They'll face off with Long Beach State here this upcoming weekend to get back into conference play. And then you got Old Dominion, who, again, had themselves a tough weekend against Charlotte, but has 4 more coming up, and they'll be looking for retribution. A couple of teams dropped out of the rankings. You had Indiana State jump out from 21 to unranked. They went 1-3 this past weekend. The Virginia Tech Hokies went 1-3, so they fall from 22 to the unranked. And then the Michigan Wolverines, they went 1-2 and fall from 23. And then number 24, Oklahoma State, is no longer ranked after having themselves a tough week here. So the top 3, again, the top 5 kind of stay true to themselves. We got some really good conference series coming up here over this next weekend as that starts to wind down. But now it's time to look at ultimately who they think are going to host these regions, right? I mean, number 1 and 2, you're flipping between Arkansas and Vanderbilt when it comes to the top of the list. Number 1 and 2, TCU 3, Mississippi State 4. But some people have Notre Dame potentially as high as 5. I know Texas, TCU, those teams were up there in the rankings. But when it comes to kind of hosting the regionals, I've seen Notre Dame there at number 5. You also have Texas, Louisville, potentially up at number 4. Mississippi State, East Carolina, based on some bracketology, hosting a couple of different regionals. Yeah, let's see here. You got Tennessee at 7, Texas at 8, Arizona at 9. In one bracketology on the other side, you got Notre Dame, Tennessee, Texas Tech, Arizona once again, South Carolina, Florida, TCU, and then Oregon potentially hosting. I'm also seeing the likes of Stanford potentially being an option to host. Charlotte, if they continue to play good baseball, could be an outside-of-the-box host. And potentially even the Pitt Panthers, right? So, again, you got to be in the top 16. You put in a potential bid to host when it comes to a regional, and then depending on where you finish is ultimately where you're going to end up. Some love to Louisiana Tech, potentially hosting a regional out there in Ruston. You got, let's see here, any other surprises? East Carolina, Mississippi State, South Carolina, all the standard guys that we mentioned at the top of the list here. So let's look at a few of the number 4 seeds, ultimately, who could be crashing the party and making a run here. Let's see. We have Oral Roberts in one projection coming out of the Summit League. You got Wright State here. This is from D1Baseball.com, potentially winning their Horizon. They have Lehigh. That's it. My Mountain Hawks winning the Patriot League, heading down to Vanderbilt, down to the Nashville Regional. You have LaSalle potentially going to Pittsburgh, according to D1 Baseball, out of the A-10 conference. You got USC Upstate. I played with some guys from USC Upstate coming out of the Big South Conference as a 4 seed. You also have Bryant University. Bryant would be representing the Northeast Conference, the NEC. You got Jackson State as well as Northeastern. Jackson State out of Southwestern Athletic Conference, the SWAC, represented by Jackson State, or Northeastern out of the Colonial Athletic Conference, the CAA, getting some love for Northeastern. You have Ball State and Morehead State potentially as number 4s out of the Mid-American for Ball State. Morehead State would be representing the Ohio Valley Conference. And rounding things out, San Diego State, you got Stony Brook. San Diego State for the Mountain West. Stony Brook out of the American East Conference. And then Western Carolina, NC Central. Western Carolina for the Southern Conference. Looks to be the top team. And then North Carolina Central out of the Mid-Eastern Conference. Again, some of these conferences you guys may have never heard of, but they all get automatic bids for their tournament qualifiers. The last 2, according to D1 Baseball, is New Orleans out of the Southland Conference and Grand Canyon Baseball out of the Western Athletic Conference, potentially representing those guys. So who out of those 4 seeds do you think could upset somebody? Everybody's got a shot. Again, now we're looking at Baseball America. We got some different names here. North Dakota State, I didn't mention. Sacramento State. So these are potentially guys ranked 1 and 2 in the conference. We said Bryant, Jacksonville State, Stony Brook. They have Connecticut potentially making the dance. Murray State, Fordham. They're going with Army out of the Patriot League. Northeastern, South Carolina Upstate. They have Samford, North Carolina A&T, Fairfield, Wright State, and Ball State being those 4 seeds coming out of the bottom. And then one last bracket here. Let's see if there's any other 4s that we didn't mention yet. Southeast Missouri would be one that we haven't said. Southeastern Louisiana. I played with a guy who played there. He was excellent. Made it to AAA with the Mariners back in the day. Guy was a stolen base machine. How nice to see they got my Mountain Hawks in here going to Palo Alto. That'd be a lot of fun. Lehigh making the trip out to Stanford for the regional. Jackson State, we said. Central Michigan would be a surprise answer here. Mercer also getting some love. Fairfield, potentially a number 4 seed. Norfolk State, South Alabama, and Oral Roberts getting some love. So if you played ball out there at a small school, small D1 school, or whether it was basketball, football, whatever it is, and you heard your team's name, that means they're having a solid year so far across college baseball. But that's the update for college baseball. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Like I said, like to keep you guys updated on the college game. Take 15 minutes a week here. Let you know how we're looking at, in the standings and some of the best series coming up. So ultimately, you guys can tune in if you get a chance, but appreciate you guys listening. So we'll step aside here now for another word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to get back into Major League Baseball conversation. What's been going on this week? Top performances, any teams, any streaks? Stick around. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. We'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching.
Hey!
The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back, and thanks again for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys tuning in. If you haven't checked out the other podcasts within the GSMC Podcast Network, do yourself a favor, check those out wherever you're listening to this, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, wherever it may be. Hit that little search icon, type in GSMC. That's going to pull up a ton of different options for you guys. If you're listening to this because you're a sports fan, today, Thursday, tonight, we got round 1 of the NFL Draft, followed by rounds 2 and 3 on Friday, and then 4 through 7 on Saturday. So you guys should check out the NFL podcast to get up to date on who's been taken, what are the surprises, any trades, what's going on out there. We also have the NBA coming down the final stretch here. It looks like 2.5 weeks left in their regular season. There's some chaos with the playoffs. You got like a play-in tournament, seeds 7 through 10, to see who's ultimately going to be seeds 7 and 8. You got a couple of races down the stretch for the 1 seed in both conferences. And, of course, you got college football with all the spring games taking place last weekend, this weekend, and over the past month here to stay up to date. And if you're not into sports, that's fine. I mean, they got weird news, there's book reviews, movies, TV shows, anything you can think of, there's a podcast for you guys out there. Now, I know I just recently updated my phone to the new software settings, and that Apple Podcast really changed and can be slightly confusing. But if you're on there, please rate and review the podcast. Leave us a 5-star review, 5-star rating. Write us a comment. If you guys leave a comment, I'll read them here on the show, whether you got a question or a hot take based on the home run derby, postseason, or not postseason, but extra innings that we talked about earlier in today's show. Let me know your thoughts, and I'll read them here on the show, and we can discuss those in some detail. But here in segment number 3, we're going to run through some of Monday and Tuesday's individual performances, who really stood out, who had some good days, give you guys some updates on what's going on across Major League Baseball here. And it starts out with Vladimir Guerrero Jr. This guy we've talked about, he is getting hot, he's in shape, and he is swinging the bat, baby. He had a 3-home-run game on Tuesday against Max Scherzer. Well, a couple of them came against Scherzer. The third one came against a guy out of the bullpen here. But 3 home runs in a game for Vlad Jr. is something that his father never did. Vlad Sr., the Hall of Famer himself, never hit 3 home runs in a game. So the kid was able to accomplish a feat even the old man wasn't able to during his Hall of Fame career. It started off with a grand slam against Max Scherzer. They were down 3-0. The Blue Jays were down 3-0 until Guerrero launched a grand slam over the left field wall, which was a hanging slider that he absolutely crushed out to left field. And this is fascinating because it comes about 11 years or so after Vlad Sr. took Max Scherzer deep during his career. Scherzer hung a slider to Vlad Sr. during his twilight years with the Baltimore Orioles, and Sr. was able to take him deep. But both of these guys have also been struck out by Max Scherzer. So the Vlad Sr. and Jr., the Guerrero father and son combo, have both struck out and gone deep against Max Scherzer, and Scherzer joins the club here. It's a small club, only 2 guys. Scherzer and Ivan Nova are the only 2 pitchers to be taken deep by both father and son during the course of their major league careers. So just a fascinating turn of events there when it comes to father and son. A couple innings later, Guerrero took a 3-2 fastball deep from Scherzer out to left center field, 436 feet. Came off the bat at 110.5 miles an hour. And then later on for his third home run, Guerrero launched a Kyle Finnegan sinker to the opposite field to give him the hat trick and 7 RBIs on the day here. So Guerrero really turning it on, had himself a key moment during his game. By the time everything, completed, Guerrero had hit 1,226 feet worth of home runs, and he becomes the 7th youngest player in Major League history to hit 3 home runs in the same game. The other 6 are Corey Seager, Boog Powell, Al Kaline, Eddie Matthews, Hal Trosky, and Mel Ott. And all of those guys, 60, 55, 52, 34, and 30 were the years. And then Seager did it in 2016. So the youth movement coming with Seager, and now Vlad Guerrero hitting 3 home runs in a game. But this was also fascinating because Scherzer came in riding a streak of 17 consecutive shutout innings until he gave up that grand slam for Vlad Jr. But, man, he is starting to turn it on here. We talked about last year he was a little bit overweight, didn't have spring training, so that could have hampered his ability to stay in shape. And here in 2021, he's been good. I mean, Guerrero now has 7 home runs. He's carrying the Toronto Blue Jays here as they're getting off to a nice start. And ultimately, it's, he's trying to put his name into the likes of Tatis Jr., Juan Soto, Acuna Jr., and as the next wave of great talent here in Major League Baseball. So Vlad Guerrero goes deep 3 times, something his dad was not even able to do during his career. But speaking of Ronald Acuna Jr., he hit himself a monstrous home run on Tuesday night. Coming back from that tweak of the midsection he had sliding into home plate on Sunday Night Baseball a week or so ago. He hit the second longest home run tracked in the major leagues this year at 481 feet. So absolute bomb to left center there in Atlanta. It was nice to see him bounce back. Exit velo was 111.9 coming off the bat. So, again, the second longest home run in the majors this year belongs to Ronald Acuna Jr. at 481. And who's hit the longest home runs? Well, I'm glad you asked out there because Yermin Mercedes for the White Sox hit one 485 back on April 8th this year to put himself at the top of the list. Acuna now second at 481. You then have Giancarlo Stanton at 471 against the Orioles in early April. And then you got a 3-way tie for 3, 4, and 5. Wilson Contreras of the Cubs hit himself one 465 feet on Monday. Now, the original StatCast came in at 491 feet, so that would have been the longest home run here in 2021. But ultimately, they recalibrated, looked at it once again, and it officially was projected at 456. So, no, that doesn't put him tied. I got dyslexic there for a minute. That'll put him at 6th on the list because Nate Lowe for the Rangers hit one 465. Fernando Tatis Jr. has 465. And then Mike Trout has one at 464. So Contreras goes from what would be the longest down to about 6th or 7th on the list. But ultimately, Acuna Jr. coming in at 481 puts him second. And just as a baseball fan, I know I'm a Phillies guy, so, Ronald Acuna being in the lineup isn't the best thing for a Phillies fan. But as a baseball fan, it was certainly nice to see Acuna back in the lineup and healthy and being able to ultimately contribute. And it's just fun to watch guys hit balls 480-plus feet and ultimately crush baseballs. So an interesting start there when it comes to home run distances for 2021. But speaking of the Phillies now, another gentleman who's had himself a heck of a couple of week run here, and that's Bryce Harper. 9 years into his career since he debuted with the Washington Nationals. Over the course of 2021, he's hitting .319 with 6 home runs. He's got a 197 OPS plus, which is just 1 point below his career high. that he set back in 2015 when he was winning the National League MVP award for the Nationals that year. But with his expected stats, the sabermetrics, they weigh expected stats based on percentages of balls put in play. Maybe guys are making ridiculous defensive plays against you. His expected stats are even better when it comes to this. He leads the majors in expected batting average at .386. His expected slugging percentage is .883. His expected weighted on base, or WOBA, is .552. And his ex-WOBA there, the weighted on base average at .552, is nearly 45 points better than the second place guy in the major leagues. You got Bryce Harper at number 1, .552. Number 2, Byron Buxton, .509. Mike Trout, third at .504, tied with Acuna Jr. at .504, and then Rafael Devers at .499. And XWOBA, or XWOBA, that we like to say here in the industry, is based on the quality of contact, strikeouts, and walks, kind of putting everything together to ultimately get that expected base on balls, expected on base percentage. And, he's not outperforming everybody else, but he's also had his best stretch since StatCast has started tracking WOBA back in 2015. There's a graph online here of kind of the weighted rolling average of 100 plate appearances, and Harper is at a career high, and the expected or the major league average is just about 310. And like I said, Bryce Harper up at 552, almost 200, 300 points better than where the average is for Major League Baseball. So the highest he had prior to 2021 was 527 back in 2015 during his MVP year. And 552 is just absolutely tremendous. And what's really contributed to this increase in the WOBA? It's the walk rate and the chase rate for Bryce Harper when it comes to being a more disciplined hitter. He's got a lifetime 15.1% walk rate, but he's up that, this year as well, and his chase rate is way down. He's managed a career low chase rate thus far of 21.5%, which means swinging at pitches out of the zone, and this was at 28% last year in 2020. So basically, Harper isn't chasing pitches out of the zone. He's taking a lot more close fastballs. He's able to manage the zone a little bit better, so taking fewer swings on tough pitches. Last year, he struggled on pitches that were non-fastballs in the zone. He only hit .226 with 2 home runs against non-fastballs, and this year he's hitting .314 with 3 home runs. So he's been able to connect with that fastball, and his walk rate is up to 18% from his career rate to 15.1, which has allowed him to have much more success at the plate as well. So it is just, he's making hard contact. He's hitting the sweet spot when he does swing. His hard hit rate or percentage of batted balls with a 95-plus mile per hour exit velocity is 52.7%, which puts him almost in the top 10th percentile of Major League Baseball. So last year it was at 50.7, which obviously doesn't sound like a huge decrease, only a couple percentage points, but that can be a big deal over the course of 162. Also, his launch angle. His launch angle is slightly down, right? So launch angle between 8 and 32 typically. It is up to or down to 18.7%. So he's hitting more line drives, making harder contact. And last year it was at 20.8. So really trying to lift the ball last year. This year, again, hitting more line drives, having himself a solid year at the plate. So the last time Harper received any MVP votes was back in 2016. So it's been a handful of years since he's even had a season close to MVP caliber. But that certainly seems like it's going to change here if he can keep up this hot streak in 2021 and continue to carry the Phillies, down the stretch or over the course of the regular season here. Lastly, a breakout performance, Corey Kluber of the New York Yankees. He's kind of changed his mindset to be more aggressive. Work that slider cutter action, kind of tunnel both of those pitches as they work to home plate, meaning they're on the same plane about halfway through, 2 home plates, and then one really drops off and the other one has a higher velocity with only a little bit of movement. So Kluber went 6 2/3, which was his longest start in more than 2 years. Again, he's dealt with some injuries down in Texas, and now with the Yankees, 6 2/3, very good for Corey Kluber. And, the Yankees are going to need him to kind of produce after they've gotten off to a slow start here, if ultimately they're looking to make a comeback, because pitching depth in New York has really been an issue for them, dealing with injuries, dealing with slow starts from some of their other top guys. They lost some pitching this offseason, and, again, it's just been a tough start for the Yankees as they've turned it around here a little bit recently, playing some better baseball, but get off to that extremely slow start where they had the worst record in the American League. So now they are up to 10-13, so improving, no longer near the worst record in the American League. That belongs to the Minnesota Twins at this current time. But Corey Kluber is going to be a big reason why the Yankees turn things around if he can build off this nice start that he had here last time out. So Vlad Jr. had himself a Tuesday. Bryce Harper has had himself a couple of weeks here getting hot for the Phillies. You also had Corey Kluber, and then Acuna, Contreras, and a lot of other guys having success offensively and just crushing baseballs here this past week for a long, long ways. But that'll do it here for segment number 3 of the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Appreciate you guys tuning in. We're going to step aside here one last time for a word from one of our sponsors and one of our sister shows. But when we come back, we're going to talk about some standouts who are maybe under the radar, right? A lot of the guys we mentioned here in this segment are big-time household names. Well, I'm going to talk to you about some guys who maybe you guys don't know or haven't recognized yet as having a heck of a start to 2021, but we're going to discuss those guys and a few other things Major League Baseball. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this.
Want to know the latest in soccer? Then listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast. From MLS, the World Cup, and the Premier League, we've got you covered. The latest updates, the hottest matches, and news on the league's top players. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Soccer Podcast.
David Beckham scores the goal to take England all the way to the World Cup finals.
Listen now.
Again, and thanks for listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Kevin Mahalik. Appreciate you guys tuning in. Here in our fourth and final segment, we're going to talk about some standouts so far in the 2021 season who are not household names. Some guys that you may have never heard of before. Other guys who are good in the past, kind of fell off performance-wise and have now bounced back to the top of their games here in 2021. Then we're going to get into a little bit of news that recently came out about potential expansion with the number of teams in Major League Baseball, what it's going to cost to join, with some locations they're talking about, and then wrap it up here, touching on the standings ever so briefly, just keeping you guys up to date with what's going on across baseball. But some of the guys here to talk about who are off to tremendous starts this year that, again, you may have never heard of, starting out with Ty France of the Seattle Mariners. Ty France plays second base for the Mariners. This is a kid, grew up in Southern California, went to San Diego State, drafted by the Padres. Ultimately, he was traded by the Padres after only 89 games with the team back in 2020. He went to Seattle with Taylor Trammell for Austin Nola and a few other guys in that deal last year, but he's certainly blossomed into a stud there for Seattle so far this year. He hasn't missed a game yet. He's playing fantastic defense, and he's also crushing it with on-base percentage. Looking at his stats for 2021, The guy's hitting .314. His on-base percentage is .406. And his OPS is .918. So 27 for 86. He's got 3 home runs, 13 RBIs, 17 runs. Certainly a surprise. I mean, even when he was drafted in round 34. Overall pick number 1,017. So nobody could really see or predict this coming up here just due to his career. In 2019, he hit .234 for San Diego. Last year, he finally got up right around that 300 mark before he was traded. Again, that was only over the course of 20 games before he was traded. But his career in Seattle now, over a 300 hitter. And again, 5 career home runs for Seattle, playing everyday second base. And he certainly looks like somebody who could potentially be part of that future out there in Seattle. And it's looking brighter and brighter as the Mariners so far are 13-11 this year. Now, they have lost 3 straight games, so it's been a tough little stretch for them here. But a heck of a start for the Mariners as a potential surprise team here in 2021, and Ty France is a big reason why. Next on the list, we got Tyler Mahle. I don't even know how to pronounce it here off the top of my head. I think it's Mahle. But for the Cincinnati Reds, a starting pitcher. Now, he's been around the Reds rotation for a few years now. In 18 and 19, he was kind of the weak link within the starting rotation with a team that had pitching problems to go already. Then in 2020, he took a little step forward thanks to reworking his slider, kind of updated his slider, and now this year has taken a huge jump and has only given up 5 earned runs in 5 starts. He even shut out the Mets on Monday nights, and a lot of this is due to his strikeout rate being way up from last year. Last year it was at 29.9%. This year at 35.3%. He has certainly proved to be excellent, and I mean, through 5 starts, he's been even better than Trevor Bauer was last year at this point in the season. Now, he's only 1-1 so far, so he hasn't won games. The Reds really haven't backed him up offensively when it comes to his performances, but 1-1 with a 1.75 ERA in 25 2/3 innings. He's got 36 strikeouts to only 11 walks, and his whip, or walks and hits per innings pitched, is at .97. So just looking back at his career, like we said, 2018, he was 7-9 with a 4.9 ERA. 2019, 3-12 with a 5.14 ERA, all the way up to this year at 1-1 and a 1.75 ERA. So he has been absolutely electric for Cincinnati, and just those off-speed pitches that he's throwing up there are filthy, and he's one of the reasons why Cincinnati is kind of hanging around there at right around 500. They're at 11-12 so far this year. They're in 4th place, but only 1 game out of 2nd when it comes to the NL Central, as those teams are pretty bunched up across that division right now. Next, we got Cedric Mullins. I've mentioned his name for the Orioles before. They've been trying to kind of value their assets, figure out who's a career guy for the Orioles. Really been in rebuild mode over the past handful of years, but, Mullins, he struggled in the past as well. I mean, career-wise, he's been with the team since 2018. He only hit .235 in 45 games. 2019, in 22 games, he hit .094. Last year was his first time getting consistent playing time, hitting .271 over 48 games. And now this year, hitting .356 with 3 home runs and 6 RBIs over 23 games. He's been absolutely fantastic. He's tied for the league lead in hits at 32 so far. He's a 5'8" speedster, but he's also hit 3 home runs this year, which is tied for last year in just about half the games. So he doesn't walk much, right? So far this year, he's only walked, 8 times. He struck out 20 times, but again, just putting the ball in play, making contact, and for somebody in Baltimore to be hitting .356 is not something I would have said here early on within the season. And Baltimore at 10-13, tied with the Yankees for last place in the American League East. They're still in rebuild mode, trying to figure out ultimately who's going to stick around for the future, who's somebody they can build around. And Cedric Mullins is throwing his name in that hat of, hey, I'm here to stay, and I'm going to be an outfielder for you guys for the next handful of years. we have Trevor Rogers, Taylor's brother. Rogers was one of the people talked about the least when it came to the Marlins pitching staff this year. I mean, you had Alcantara, Sixto Sanchez, Lopez. Well, Trevor Rogers has been excellent. He leads all lefty starters in strikeout rate in Major League Baseball, which is kind of fascinating with the likes of Clayton Kershaw and others across the sport. He is at 34.9%. And I've even heard some Dontrelle Willis comparisons when it comes to his stuff. So he has been excellent for the Marlins, and they've needed him due to some other injuries in that rotation. He is 3-1 with a 1.29 ERA in 5 starts so far this year. He has 28 innings pitched, 38 strikeouts to only 10 walks, so he's been fantastic and in the zone. And last year, his first year with the team was 1-2 with a 6.11 ERA in 28 innings. So 28 innings last year, 28 innings this year. He's only given up 4 runs this year compared to 19 last year and almost cut the hits in half. He's allowed 18 compared to 32 a year ago. So Trevor Rogers has been absolutely electric for the Fish so far, as they are currently in 4th place in the National League East at 10-13. But without him, they'd be way down in that basement and struggling to find anybody. For the Texas Rangers, you got Nick Solak. He's a former Yankees prospect, bounced around a little bit in his career, but he has been excellent for the Texas Rangers so far. This year, he is hitting .307. He's got 7 home runs, which is tied for second in the major leagues with a handful of other guys. He hit 2 more home runs just this past week. And, he's crushing Joey Gallo when it comes to home runs. Everybody thought Gallo was the only guy in Texas who could hit him. Well, Solak is lapping the field. 7 home runs, 14 RBIs. I mean, if you look back at the last couple of years, in 2019, he only had 5 home runs. 2020, he had 2 home runs and hit .268 and jumped up all the way this year to .307 with 7 home runs and 14 RBIs. As Solak looks to cement himself as somebody who Texas is going to continue to build around as they get through their rebuild. You also have Alex Verdugo. This guy who pretty much got traded for Mookie Betts. He was the return for Boston. That was at the big part of that deal there. So he's holding up defensively, and offensively, he's off to an even better start than Mookie is this year. The guy's hitting .325, 3 home runs, 13 RBIs. In 80 at-bats, and that's, his best average. Last year in Boston, he hit .308 for them after that trade, and these are career bests after his time in L.A. when he hit .174 in 15 games, .260 in 37 games, and then .294 over 106. So now that he's an everyday guy in Boston, he is comfortable. He's feeling good out in center field. He is, he is such a surprise for Boston, and he's making that trade not look as horrendous, and Red Sox fans are feeling a little bit better about it now that they've gotten the performance from Alex Verdugo. And then the last guy I wanted to talk about was Danny Duffy. He's one of the guys who I mentioned. You probably know his name, but he had certainly fallen off over the past couple of years. If you look at 2018, 4.88 ERA, 2019, 4.34, 2020, 4.95. Well, so far in 2021, he is 3-1 with a .39 ERA, and that is just absurd. As Duffy's been with Kansas City his entire career. This is year 10 in Kansas City. He's one of only 2 Royals still around from those 2014, 2015 World Series teams, and he has been electric. 23 innings, only allowed 1 earned run, 18 hits, and he has 27 strikeouts to 6 walks. So filling up the zone, getting back into the groove, and he's one of the biggest reasons why the Royals have the second best record in all of baseball. They had the best record only a few days ago, LA lost last night, so they're back up top with the highest winning percentage in baseball. LA and San Francisco both lost, so they do have the best record in all of baseball at 14-8, the highest winning percentage. And Duffy, who's made 196 starts in his Royals career, is maybe playing the best baseball of his career. His lowest ERA came back in 2013, but he only had 5 starts. Outside of that, his best year was probably 2014, where he had a .253 ERA, but this year at 0.39, absolutely absurd with what's going on with Danny Duffy. So those 7 guys have certainly surprised and really stood out early on as guys you may not have placed a bet on preseason to be studs for the month of April, but showing that they still have some left in the tank or showing that they belong and deserve to be part of the future for their organizations. The last thing I want to touch on here for you guys, like I said, some recent news came out that Major League Baseball teams' expansion fees could rise to the $2.2 billion with a B dollar range for a new team, new organization coming into Major League Baseball. Commissioner Bobby Manfred said online during a conference that the average Major League Baseball value of a franchise is $2.2 billion. The New York Yankees at the top at $6.75. But if you're coming in as a new organization, you're probably going to pay about market average, which is right around 2.2. And just think about that, right? Giving you guys some figures here. The Rockies and Marlins each joined Major League Baseball in 1993 and paid $95 million with an M, $95 million to join the league. And then in 1998, the Diamondbacks and Rays came in and paid $130 million. So there was a $35 million increase over the course of 5 years. So 98 to 2021, I don't know, say 20, 25 years. So go 35 times 6, that's $180 million if inflation were to remain the same. But instead, you're going from $130 million to $2.2 billion. And people are saying baseball is a dying sport, and they got to figure it out. We're losing fans. What the heck's going on here? But, man, $2.2 billion to be part of a potential expansion here moving forward. And Manfred also said, and he repeated, that the MLB will not consider expansion until the Oakland Athletics and Tampa Bay Rays get new ballparks. So the A's have proposed a stadium in downtown Oakland. The Rays will be pursuing a splitting season series between Tampa and Montreal. Not really looking for a new stadium, so I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon. Manfred did mention some potential locations as candidates. Some of them we've talked about here on the show in the past, but Charlotte, North Carolina, Las Vegas, Nevada, you got Montreal, Nashville, Tennessee, Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, British Columbia up there in Canada as potential spots where people could expand. But he also talked about how expansion is not purely additive. You have to have perspective of existing owners. There are huge shared revenue streams that could be diluted as a result of now having 32 teams as opposed to just 30 as your denominator when it comes to shared revenue. So they have to look at that as well as they're deciding whether or not to expand or locations and things like that. So it's certainly fascinating to see this conversation pop up and to see ultimately if it goes somewhere in the near future. But rounding out today's episode, we still have Boston atop the American League East by 3 games. Kansas City leads the White Sox in the Central by 2 games. The Oakland Athletics still in first place by 2 games over Seattle and 2.5 over Houston, as Houston has turned it back around. In the National League, you have the Mets in first place by a half a game over the Braves and Phillies, as the Mets are at 9-9. Every other team is under 500. Milwaukee 2 games up on the Pirates as well as the Cardinals in the NL Central. And then the Dodgers now tied with the San Francisco Giants at 15-9 out west, with the Padres in 4th place at 2.5 back, 13-12 overall out west. And that was just your 30-second rundown of the standings and where we're at here currently on Thursday, April 29th. But that'll do it for today's episode. I appreciate you guys listening in as always. I'll ask you one more time here. Check us out on social media, GSMC Baseball Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, as well as please rate and review the podcast. Share us with one of your friends. Hit those 3 little dots. Hey, share, text message, let somebody know. This is the best baseball podcast available to listen to out there on demand. But that's it for today's episode. Hopefully you guys are having a fantastic week out there. Enjoy your weekend, everybody, and I'll talk to you guys again on Monday.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Baseball Podcast. part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.